The Nile was quiet that night. Its surface, as smooth as polished obsidian, reflected the pale moon in a shimmering trail that stretched far beyond the bend of the river. Crickets hummed along the reed-lined banks. A warm breeze rustled the papyrus leaves, carrying with it the soft scent of lotus blossoms and distant cooking fires that had long since burned down to embers. The world, or at least this little stretch of it, had fallen into a comfortable hush. A single boat, its hull gently creaking with every sway, drifted with the current. I was aboard that boat. Just me, an old scribe with aching joints and a heart, swollen with too many stories. The candle beside me flickered once as if to wink at the moon and then held steady. I leaned back into a pile of worn cushions, took a sip from a cup of date wine, and listened to the water slap gently against the side. "Let me tell you," I said, mostly to the night but also to anyone listening, about a land where gods once walked and the desert whispered secrets to those patient enough to listen. You see, in this land, Kemet as we called it, the Black Land, life was a rhythm. The Nile would rise and the people would plant. The Nile would fall and the people would harvest. In between we built monuments to the sky and wrote poems. To the stars. The boat rocked slightly as if nodding along. I lit a bit of incense, a lazy trail of smoke curling up into the velvet night. Somewhere in the reeds, a frog gave a sleepy croak. The night was content to wait. It's important to know that the Egypt I speak of is not the one of loud museums and cold sarcophagi behind glass. No, this Egypt was warm. It smelled of baked earth and honeyed bread. It echoed with the laughter of children chasing goats through sun-baked alleys. It hummed with the chants of priests before sunrise, their voices like soft thunder beneath the pillars of forgotten temples. And the people, the people were like the Nile itself, unhurried, mysterious, and full of life. Tonight, I'll take you through their world, not through war or conquest, but through the quiet corners, a baker's oven before dawn, the hush of temple steps at noon, a potter shaping clay as his cat naps beside him. These are the stories that make up a civilization, not the names carved in stone, but the sighs between breaths. But we begin here, on this boat. As a child, I believed the Nile spoke. My grandmother swore it whispered stories to those willing to float beneath its moonlit surface in silence. So here I am now, older than most fig trees, hoping the river will remember my name and share a few tales with me one last time. The first time I saw a crocodile was just after my 7th birthday. I was barefoot, hopping between flat river rocks, and the creature was so still I thought it was carved from black granite. It blinked once, slow as a priest's chant, and then slid beneath the water without a ripple. I didn't scream. I just watched quietly. Even then I knew that anything so calm must hold some kind of ancient wisdom. The elders used to say the gods chose the Nile to walk beside because it never rushed. It meandered, it observed. Even in flood season, it carried its power like a king wears his crown. Not boastfully, but as a matter of fact. I tell you this because I want you to feel it. Not just to imagine the Nile, but to feel its weight, its warmth, its breath. Close. Your eyes, if you'd like. Lean back. Can you hear the distant flute? Somewhere, a fisherman hums an old tune. He sings of a girl who once turned into a bird and flew into the sun. It's a sad song, but he smiles as he sings. That's the way of things here. Grief and joy like two sides of the same coin, worn smooth by time. I had a friend once, a potter named Amunhotep. He swore the Nile changed colors depending on who was watching. For him, it was always green. For me, it was silver. That's because you dream too much, he said, smudging clay across his cheek. I told him it was because I wrote stories, and stories always begin in silver. He laughed. He always laughed. Some say the stars in Egypt hang lower than elsewhere, that they're not just above you but around you, like ancient eyes watching kindly from the dunes. On nights like this, I believed them. The boat drifted closer to the western bank, where a lonely palm tree leaned as if eavesdropping on my memories. I smiled. We hadn't even begun the journey yet, but already the river was telling me things I thought I'd forgotten. And so, dear listener, rest your head. Breathe with the river. Let it carry you through the hush of ancient time. One slow ripple at a time. We are only just beginning. The sky was still the color of old linen when the first rooster called. In Zep Tepi, a small village curled lazily along a bend in the Nile, the day did not begin with haste. It yawned into being, soft and slow. Shadows clung stubbornly to corners, of mud-brick homes, while a lazy mist floated above the irrigation canals like a spirit reluctant to leave. I had stepped off the boat for a while, curious to see if anything had changed. It hadn't. A soft thudding reached my ears. Thump, 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 a steady rhythm of pestle on grain. In the courtyard of a low-roofed home, a woman ground emmer wheat with practiced hands. Her hair was wrapped in a faded linen scarf, her fingers calloused but graceful, moving as though in tune with an ancient lullaby. Nearby, a child lay curled, like a cat beneath a fig tree, still caught in the tail end of a dream. The morning air carried the faint scent of barley porridge and warm goat milk. Somewhere, someone was slicing dates, the sticky sweetness mingling with the earthy scent of damp soil. The Nile had recently receded, and the fields shimmered with dew, newly planted with flax and onions, waiting patiently beneath the newborn sun. A boy ran past me, barefoot, laughing at nothing. His dog, a scruffy creature with ears too large for its head, chased after him. They disappeared into the alley between houses, their laughter bouncing off the clay walls like a pebble skipped across a pond. This was the Egypt I had always loved most. Not the one etched in scrolls or sealed in tombs, but this, the quiet shuffle of sandals on packed dirt, the soft groan of a well pulley, the way smoke curled from a chimney in spirals, as if reluctant to rise too high too quickly. A potter was, already at his wheel. His hands, caked in red clay, turned and shaped with patient grace. A cat sat beside him, her tail twitching, half asleep. She opened one eye to watch me pass, and then closed it again, unimpressed. "Good morning," the potter said without looking up. His voice was deep, a bit gravelly. "You walk like someone chasing a memory." I smiled. "Maybe I am." He chuckled softly. "This village is full of them." Further on, by the water's edge, a group of women washed linen in silence. The rhythm of their motions, the slap of fabric on stone, was as steady as a priest's chant. They did not speak much. They didn't need to. Their movements were their language: scrub, rinse, twist, fold. Even the river seemed to hush in their presence. A small shrine stood at the edge of the village, its limestone face weathered but proud. A palm frond offering had been left at its base, along with a piece of dried fish and a few carnelian beads. No one approached it hurriedly. Even the children walked a little slower near it, as if the gods inside were still dreaming. The sun crept higher. The village stirred in slow waves. A merchant opened his stall and gently arranged his baskets of lentils and garlic. A young girl brushed dust from the steps of her home with a bundle of reeds tied together with string. Two elders argued softly beneath a tree about whether today was a good day for fishing. Neither seemed particularly interested in winning the debate. The baker, a wide-shouldered man with arms like amphorae, lit his oven with kindling from a bundle wrapped in palm fronds. He greeted me with a nod and pulled a lump of dough from a cloth-covered bowl. "Bread's not ready yet," he said, not unkindly, "but the smell is free." I inhaled deeply. He was right. The smell was worth waking for. A donkey brayed somewhere. In the distance, followed by a half-hearted response from another across the village. The day was beginning to hum with quiet life. Not a buzz, not a roar, just a hum, like a well-tuned lyre string or a contented sigh. I sat beneath a tamarisk tree and watched the village stretch into its day. There was a rhythm here, deeper than time, older than kings. It pulsed through the dusty lanes, echoed in the call of doves, and rested gently on every rooftop. The rhythm of people simply being. This was not a village lost in time. It was a village in time. Perfectly placed, perfectly present, and as I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the rising sun kiss my face, I knew that no scroll or carving could ever truly capture this. The way morning arrived in Zep Tepi, not with noise or clamor, but with breath and heartbeat, with dust and light, with bread and laughter. A life lived softly, a story told slowly. By midday, the sun hung directly above the land, casting no shadow and sparing no roof from its heat. The village had quieted again, people retreating into shaded courtyards, clay jars sweating cool water, conversations soft and sparse. And it was at this hour, when the world paused to breathe, that I walked toward the great temple. It stood on the edge of Zep Tepi like a slumbering lion, massive, solemn, and carved from sandstone that shimmered golden in the noonday glare. The entrance was framed by two tall pylons, etched with stories that stretched higher than any palm tree. The gods looked down with eyes that had seen centuries. I passed beneath them in silence. Inside, the temperature dropped like a whispered secret. Cool shadows danced between columns so vast they felt like the trunks of the first trees. My footsteps echoed softly on the flagstone floor, as if even sound had to bow its head here. The smell of incense was thick, frankincense and myrrh curling in the air like silk threads. Light spilled through high slits in the ceiling, illuminating the swirling smoke in golden shafts. Dust motes floated like lazy spirits, turning gently, aimlessly, as though in some slow, eternal dance. There were only a few of us in the temple. A priest in white linen robes moved silently near the altar, carrying a shallow dish of lotus petals. His head was shaved, his face serene. Behind him, a younger acolyte tended a small flame, keeping it fed with sprigs of resin and cedar bark. No one spoke. Words were too heavy here, too clumsy for this place where the gods listened with breath, and bone not with ears. The inner sanctum loomed ahead, a chamber behind tall doors of dark wood and copper. Only the high priest could enter, but even from where I stood the weight of it was palpable. It was not darkness that dwelled inside, but stillness. A stillness so complete it made your own thoughts feel loud. I stood before a row of seated statues, each god serene and strange, their forms half human, half animal, their eyes carved wide open as though they never slept. I gazed up at the figure of Amun-Ra, the hidden one, the one who created himself from nothing. His crown rose in two tall plumes, and his face, though stone, seemed to shimmer in the filtered light. The air here was thick with age. Every breath tasted faintly of time. A woman stepped beside me. She carried a small offering bowl, dates, barley, and a folded piece of linen embroidered with tiny blue symbols. She knelt, touched her forehead to the stone, and whispered something. I could not hear, but I felt it. A wish, perhaps, or a thank you, or a farewell. Here, prayer was not a performance, it was an intimacy. A conversation held not with words, but with presence. As I walked slowly through the pillared hall, my hand brushed one of the stone columns. It was warm from centuries of sun. The carvings on it, hieroglyphs, birds and eyes and seated figures, felt smooth in some places, deep in others. My fingers traced the curve of a feather, the tail of a jackal, the spiral of a sun. It was like touching memory itself. Outside, life continued. The river flowed, goats bleated, children played. But inside, Time softened its grip. I sat on a low bench beside a basin of still water and simply listened. The hum of wind through the columns, the occasional creak of stone cooling, the slow, precise movements of the priest tending to ritual duties unchanged for hundreds of years. Even the silence had texture. This temple had stood for lifetimes. It had seen floods, droughts, kings and famines, and yet it endured, not out of defiance, but out of purpose. It was built not to impress, but to align, to bring the rhythms of human life closer to the eternal. And in that quiet hour, beneath the painted ceilings and among the statues of falcons and ibis-headed gods, I felt the rhythm too. My heartbeat slowed, my breath deepened. The world outside became a murmur, a memory, and for a moment I was not an old scribe with a candle and a boat. I was simply another breath in the sacred hush, another soul wrapped in linen and dust, welcomed by the gods not with thunder, but with calm. The heat began to loosen its grip as afternoon unfurled over Zep Tepi. The light softened, turned honey-colored, and draped itself across the village like a worn cotton shawl. Shadows grew long and gentle, and slowly, like flowers opening at dusk, the market came alive. It was not a grand market, just a broad patch of trodden earth near the village's edge, where woven mats lay like sleepy stars, each one its own tiny world. No fanfare announced its opening. It simply appeared, growing out of the dust and breeze, as if the ground remembered it from the day before and chose to bring it back once more. I wandered through it slowly, like one wading through a stream, not in search of anything, but content to be surrounded. There was music here, though no instruments played. It lived in the murmur of conversation, the rustle of baskets, the clink of pottery. A woman with bracelets stacked like dates on her arms haggled with a fig seller, their voices rising and falling like sparrows chatting in flight. Nearby, a man demonstrated how to tell if a melon was sweet, thumping it with his knuckle and listening for a tone only he seemed to understand. The smells, oh, the smells, rolled in waves: roasted chickpeas, tangy with salt and crushed coriander, honey cakes sticky with sesame. Fennel and cumin stirred in baskets, their scents dancing in the air like invisible songs. Someone walked past with a clay jug of warm beer, its frothy top sloshing lazily. A child, sticky-fingered, bit into a slice of date bread and smiled with her entire face. I paused by a spice merchant's stand. He had no sign, only rows of cloth bundles filled with color. Reds like desert dusk, yellows like summer fields, greens that glowed cool in the shade. He didn't speak, but his eyes sparkled with the mischief of someone who knew his stall was pure magic. "Smell this," he finally said, handing me a pinch of powder from a small jar. I did, and was immediately transported to some memory I didn't. No, I had. A warm evening, a mother's kitchen, rain tapping a rooftop far from here. What is it? I asked. He shrugged. Home, maybe. Further down, I found a man selling charms and beads. His fingers were stained with ochre, and he wore a necklace strung with tiny ceramic cats. For protection, he said, holding one up. They chase bad dreams. And if I don't have bad dreams, then they'll nap beside you. I almost bought one for that alone. In a shaded corner, an old woman sat behind a low table covered in linen scraps. She embroidered slowly, her needle dipping in and out like a bird sipping water. The patterns were tiny: lotus petals, falcons, spirals like snail shells. She hummed as she worked, not a song but a rhythm, as if her hands were remembering something. Older than speech, each thread remembers the sun, she said softly, not looking up. That's what makes the cloth warm. I sat near her for a while, not talking, just watching the market unfold around us. There was no urgency here, no shouting, no pushing. Even the bargaining was gentle, more like storytelling than strategy. You didn't just buy garlic. You listened to where it was grown, how the soil near the southern fields was sweeter this year, how the rain came late, but just in time. Everything had a tale. Every item had a journey. I bought a small jar of dried hibiscus flowers, not because I needed them, but because the seller had a laugh like wind chimes and said they made tea that could cool even the dreams of a pharaoh. The sun dipped lower, casting the market in amber. Faces glowed, baskets emptied. Children ran in loops, chasing each other between legs and crates, their joy echoing like flutes. An old man played a flute, in fact, though quietly, as if for himself. The notes curled through the stalls like smoke, thin and sweet. He played, with eyes closed, the music skipping over cobbles and drifting up into the branches of the acacia tree that shaded his stool. And just like that, I realized this market wasn't about buying or selling. It was about remembering. Remembering that life was made not of thrones or wars, but of shared bread, exchanged smiles, spices traded for stories. It was about being seen, known, greeted by name and gesture. The kind of place where someone might offer you a melon, not because you asked, but because they noticed your hands looked tired. And so I stayed until the last stall packed away, until the last cat stretched and wandered off, until the dust settled into quiet. And as I walked back toward the boat, jar of hibiscus tea in hand, and the sun painting the path behind me in gold, I knew something small and beautiful had settled in my chest, the kind of peace that smells like coriander and sounds like distant flutes. Night fell like a curtain gently drawn. The sky turned from gold to lavender, then slowly deepened into a velvet blue speckled with stars. Not the bright, sharp stars of winter, but the soft, wide stars of the Egyptian summer, warm, familiar, and just distant enough to wonder if they were listening. In Zep Tepi, as the last of the daylight slipped behind the dunes, families gathered around low fires. Smoke rose in graceful spirals, the smell of wood mingling with herbs and grilled onions. There was no rush to eat, no clamor. Just slow, deliberate motion, passing bowls, breaking bread, dipping fingers into warm stews thick with lentils, leeks, and coriander. I was invited to sit with a family beneath an olive tree. They made room for me as if they'd been expecting me all along. The mat beneath us was woven from papyrus reeds. Simple clay bowls were placed between us, their rims uneven, their surfaces faintly stained with use. The food was humble but hearty. Flatbread, still warm from the oven, goat cheese wrapped in fig leaves, a stew so fragrant it made you close your eyes for a moment before tasting. The mother served first. Her hands were quick but gentle, her face lined not from age but from years of smiling at the sun. Her husband poured water into small cups, then added a splash of pomegranate juice, turning it the color of dusk. "Eat slowly," he said with a wink. "There's no prize for finishing first." Laughter bubbled up, not loud but warm. The kind of laughter that doesn't draw attention, just makes the air softer. Children giggled nearby, playing with pebbles arranged into little pyramids. A boy showed me his creation, a tiny structure with careful layers and a pebble at the top. He claimed was a sleeping cat pretending to be a god. I believed him. Someone told a story. Not a grand tale of heroes or kings, but a simple one, about a stubborn donkey that refused to cross a stream unless it was bribed with apples. The whole family joined in with little details. How the donkey sneezed when it saw dates. How it once interrupted a priest's chant by braying at the wrong moment. It was silly, and it was perfect. The fire crackled quietly. Shadows played on the nearby wall like finger puppets in an old theater. Someone added more wood. Sparks danced upward, vanishing into the starlight. A breeze stirred the olive branches, and for a moment I could hear the distant rush of the Nile like a mother's lullaby sung from behind a veil. I watched the firelight flicker on the curve of a clay bowl. It was chipped on one side, faintly, cracked near the bottom. But it held warmth, held food, held stories, like the people here. No one here was in a hurry to leave the fire. No one checked the sky to count stars or watched the horizon for messages. They simply sat, ate, smiled, existed. There was a kind of courage in that, a quiet rebellion against the restless hunger of time. One of the elders leaned closer, his voice soft and raspy. "When I was a boy," he said, "I thought stars were holes poked in the sky so the gods could peek through and watch us sleep. Now I'm old and I still think the same. The only difference is I'm not afraid of them watching anymore." He laughed gently and sipped his drink. A girl beside him hummed a lullaby. It was just a few notes repeated, like the sound of wind catching a loose shutter. The melody curled through the group like a ribbon, tying the moment together. Then came the silence. Not the awkward kind, not the heavy kind, but the good kind. The kind that wraps around you like a wool blanket. The kind that lets your mind wander without getting lost. The kind that tastes like baked dates and sounds like crickets just starting their nighttime choir. People began to rise one by one, stretching their arms, brushing crumbs from their clothes. Someone gathered the children. Someone fed the fire. One last time so it would die slowly, not all at once. I stayed a while longer. The mat beneath me had warmed. My hands smelled of smoke and spices. My heart beat slower, as if finally syncing with the rhythm of the village, the rhythm that didn't chase minutes or measure hours, but lived gently from one breath to the next. Looking up, I saw Orion. He always stood guard over Egypt, his belt slanting like a bow. The ancients believed he was Osiris walking the sky. Tonight, he looked more like a father watching over his children from a quiet rooftop. The family bid me good night with smiles, palms pressed together in the old way. No need for words. The fire had already spoken enough for us all. And as I made my way back to the riverbank, the world hushed around me, only the soft crunch of sand beneath my feet, the occasional splash of a fish in the distance, and the rustling whisper of palm fronds sharing secrets with the breeze. It was night in Egypt, and everything, even the shadows, was at peace. The river welcomed me back without a word. Its surface was glass now, the moon laying across it like a scarf of silver. The boat creaked gently as I stepped aboard, as though stretching after a nap. I settled into my usual spot, among cushions that smelled faintly of cedar and sun-warmed linen. My candle flickered back to life with a quiet sigh. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called. I lay back, eyes toward the stars. The Nile carried me, not fast, not slow, but just enough. Just enough to feel like I was drifting not only through space, but through time. And as often happens on such nights, a memory returned. It was many years ago, in a season where the river had risen higher than expected. Crops were unsure, the fields temperamental. I had been younger then, stronger in body but already soft in heart. I was sent on an errand for a temple librarian to deliver scrolls from Thebes to a shrine far downstream. It was meant to be a simple task. The boat I took then was smaller, narrower, more stubborn against the current. My only companion was a fisherman who spoke to his oar more than to me. He smelled of riverweed and salt and had a laugh like cracking reeds. His name was Beck. He had a theory that the Nile was alive, not just as a giver of life, but as a listener. "It hears what you think, not what you say," he once told me, squinting at the water. "So be careful what you wish for when you're dreaming." We made camp one night on an island rarely visited. It was little more than a sandbar with reeds, but the stars there seemed closer, as if they had something to say. That night, Beck shared a story. "There was once a boy," he began, stirring the embers of our fire with a stick. "Born during a rare eclipse when both sun and moon hid their faces. The priest said he would be unlucky, But his mother, a basket weaver, named him Hanu, which means to listen. She believed he was not cursed, only quiet. The fire cracked gently. Hanu grew up hearing things others couldn't. The rustle of snake scales across papyrus, the sigh of lotus petals when they closed for the night, even the dreams of crocodiles. They were not scary dreams, mostly about sun and fish, but still it made the villagers uneasy. Beck smiled into the fire. One day, a terrible drought came. The Nile refused to rise. The land cracked. People wept. And no priest or noble could explain why. He paused to throw another twig into the fire, so they went to Hanu, the boy who listened, and he lay beside the Nile for 3 days, with his ear to the mud. When he returned, he said only one thing: "The river is lonely." I remember laughing then softly. And what did they do? They sang to it, Beck said, as if it were the most obvious thing. Old songs, forgotten ones, songs sung by grandmothers while grinding grain, songs hummed by girls braiding their sisters' hair. And that night, the Nile rose, just a little, but enough. He looked at me then, eyes bright beneath thick brows. "Never forget, Scribe," he said. "The river doesn't need your fear, it needs your memory." And now, all these years later, drifting under a sky unchanged, I remembered that tale, not for its lesson but for its texture, the way it folded into the night like a soft blanket, the way it turned silence into story. My candle danced again. The river sighed, and I, old and floating, whispered into the dark, "I remember, Beck, I remember." The stars above blinked slowly. The moon, round and watchful, followed me down the waterway. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaked once, as if in sleepy agreement. This river has carried so many, kings and slaves, lovers and thieves, priests and fools, and me, a scribe with nothing to offer but a story and a quiet breath. The boat rocked gently. The reeds whispered secrets I didn't need to understand. Tonight, I was not going anywhere in particular. I was only drifting. And sometimes that is enough. Morning came slowly, as if it too had fallen asleep upon the boat. The sky lightened behind a gauze of clouds, the sun a faint suggestion on the horizon. The Nile carried me onward, and somewhere not far from where the water curved gently toward the east, I arrived at a place of quiet reverence, Per Medjat, the House of Writings. Not quite a temple, not quite a school, something in between. It sat nestled among date palms and mud-brick courtyards, its entrance plain but purposeful. To most it looked like any other building, but to those who knew it was a sanctuary of silence and ink. I stepped inside and the air changed, cool, dry, still. The scent of papyrus and myrrh lingered like old perfume. Stone shelves lined the walls, filled with rolls of scrolls tied in linen bands. There were no windows, only narrow slits to let in just enough light for reading without inviting heat. Clay lamps burned with quiet steadiness, casting dancing shadows upon the stone. Young Scribe greeted me with a silent nod. His fingers were stained with soot from ink, his gaze calm as if it had been trained to read not just text but time itself. He led me to a low table. Upon it a scroll had already been unfurled, its surface aged to the color of almond skin. The characters, hieratic, not the formal hieroglyphs, danced across the page in swift, practiced strokes, each one curving with purpose, like reeds bowing in the wind. I ran my fingers just above the ink, not touching. To touch would be to break the spell. The scroll told of a poem written in the days of Pharaoh Thutmose, not a poem of war or kingship, but of longing, a gardener's quiet ode to a woman who walked past his fig trees every morning. She walks, with the rhythm of Nile water, her smile like lotus opening at dusk. I tend the figs, but it is her shadow I follow until night takes her from me. It was unsigned, most of the great poems were. The scribes of Egypt didn't write to be remembered. They wrote to remember. Another scroll spoke of stars, how they were mapped, how their risings told the story of seasons, of harvests, of fates. But even in their precision, the stars were described not with cold calculation, but with affection. Sirius rises, and so do our hearts. For with her return comes the flood, and with the flood life. She is the heartbeat of the sky. A library like this was not merely a place of study. It was a place of listening. The scrolls, brittle and rolled with care, did not speak in loud voices. They whispered, they waited. And when someone truly listened, they sang. I wandered the narrow aisles slowly. Each scroll had a mark, some a dot of ochre, some a ribbon of faded blue thread, others a simple slash carved into the wood of the shelf. To the untrained eye, chaos, but to a scribe, order, a gentle breathing system. One shelf was devoted entirely to dreams, visions recorded by priests, by midwives, by old men during flood seasons. Some were warnings, some were riddles, some were just dreams. Unfinished thoughts of the night, captured in ink before morning could erase them. I dreamed of a falcon made of sand. It flew without wings, and where it passed, the river turned to wine. I woke thirsty, but not for drink. A dream, a metaphor, a prophecy. It didn't matter. The beauty of the library was not in its answers, but in the way it held questions without fear. In a side chamber, lit only by 2 small oil lamps, sat the oldest scroll. It was encased in a glass box, not because of wealth, but because of time. The fibers had darkened, the ink nearly vanished, but it remained. It was not a law, not a prayer, but a lullaby. Sleep, child, beneath the eye of Horus. The crocodiles are full, the lions are tired. The stars keep watch. The river sings, sleep, child, tomorrow the figs will ripen. I read it 3 times. The room was silent, but I felt the echo of a mother's voice, soft and sure, singing to a baby who had long since become dust. Yet somehow, the love remained, suspended in ink, waiting. I stayed in that room for a long, while eventually the young scribe returned. He offered me a small jar of ink and a strip of clean papyrus. Write something, he said simply. I stared at the blankness. What does one say in the presence of 1,000 voices? At last I wrote only this. I was here, I listened, and I remembered. He nodded when I handed it back, as if I had passed some gentle test. And as I stepped back into the warm daylight, the sun now high and soft, I felt lighter. Not because I had left something behind, but because I had carried something with me, a hush, a poem, a lullaby. The scrolls had whispered, and I had heard. The flood had passed. The Nile, generous and steady, had poured itself over the land like a blessing, and now, weeks later, it had receded, retreating with the quiet dignity of a guest who knows when to leave, and in its wake, it left the black. Earth Kemet, we called it. The dark, silty soil so rich it smelled almost sweet, moist and full of promise, the kind of earth you could crumble between your fingers and feel life pressing upward from within. I walked among the fields at dawn. The sun had just begun to stretch its golden arms over the horizon. The air was cool, touched with the breath of river mist and crushed grass. Insects stirred lazily. Birds called to each other from the tops of newly uncovered trees. Egrets paced the edge of shallow ditches, long legs stepping with elegant caution, like dancers on a temple floor. Men and women were already in motion. Some carried tools slung across their shoulders, wooden plows, curved hoes, bundles of sharpened reeds. Others led oxen yoked in pairs, their hides dappled with dried mud. The animals snorted and blinked in the soft light, their breath steaming in short clouds. No one rushed. Here, time moved not by the hourglass, but by the soil. Seeds are not persuaded by impatience. They wait for warmth, for hands, for rhythm. A boy with sun-browned skin knelt beside a furrow. His small hands pushed millet seeds into the earth with careful precision, one by one. His lips moved as he worked, not in speech but in song, a tune he'd likely learned from his father, who had learned it from his own. Seed in soil, drink the light. Grow in dark, rise in night. Root like fingers, leaf like sky. Let the wind teach you to fly. It was a planting song. Not magic, not exactly, but something close. Nearby, an old woman scattered flax seeds in broad, graceful arcs. The seeds fell like rain upon the soil, vanishing into its open mouth. She didn't look down as she worked. Her gaze was on the horizon, on the clouds, on the way the wind tugged at the hem of her robe. She'd done this many times before. So had the earth. Between furrows, children played. They chased each other with palm-frond brooms, laughing in little bursts that startled nearby doves into flight. A dog, lean and alert, barked once and then flopped into a patch of sun-warmed grass with a satisfied groan. A man near the edge of the field used a shaduf, a long wooden lever balanced over a post, to lift water from a narrow canal. He poured it into the channels that webbed through the field like veins, the water moving with a gurgling sound that felt like breathing. All of this, the tools, the seeds, the songs, the rhythms, was older than any monument, older than most names. It was Egypt, not in marble or gold, but in motion, in hands that knew where to press and when to pause. I stopped by a resting spot beneath a tamarisk tree. A basket sat nearby, half filled with freshly pulled onions. A young girl noticed me and offered one with shy fingers. "They're sweeter this year," she said. "The flood didn't stay too long." I bit into it. She was right. It was sharp, but behind the bite was a sweetness like sun-dried grass and morning fog, the kind of taste you couldn't find in cities. As the sun climbed higher, the fields shimmered with quiet activity. Nothing frantic, no shouting. Only the soft scuff of sandals on soil, the clink of pottery jars, the low murmur of shared labor. A farmer laughed as his ox sat down stubbornly in the middle of a row. "He wants a break already," he grumbled, scratching its ear affectionately. And still the planting went on, lines drawn by foot and hand, grids made not with rulers, but with rope and memory, each row a hope, each furrow a future. There was no need for speeches. The land knew. It had always known. I sat and watched until the shadows shortened and the heat thickened. Then, as if cued by a chorus unseen, the workers began to gather. They left the fields not in silence, but in the gentle hum of satisfaction. Some carried baskets heavier than others, but all bore the same invisible weight, the promise of harvest. Before leaving, a woman knelt and pressed her palm flat into the soil. Just once, a gesture of thanks. Or perhaps apology, for stepping, digging, changing what the earth had offered. Either way, it was enough. The breeze carried the scent of crushed leaves and wet clay as I returned to the path. Behind me, the fields stood quiet again, save for the whisper of wind through young shoots. And I thought, here is the heart of Egypt, not in crowns or battles, but in this, in the way the soil remembers your footsteps, in the way a child learns to plant by watching a shadow move across a furrow. In the way the land accepts both your hunger and your hope. The flood was over, and the earth once again had begun to breathe. There is something sacred in the act of shaping clay, not because of ritual or doctrine, but because of the intimacy of it, the way fingers press into the earth, the way the earth responds. In a land where gods are carved in stone and scribes write destinies in ink, the potter works in silence, coaxing form from formlessness. The workshop sat at the far edge of the village, not hidden, but quiet. It breathed the same rhythm as the fields, slow, circular, content to wait, the scent of wet clay mixed with ash, and the sharp sweetness of acacia wood burning low in the kiln. As I stepped inside, The warmth welcomed me, not just the heat from the fire, but the warmth of movement, of care, of things in process. There were 3 potters at work, all barefoot, their feet white with dust, their robes tied high to keep from brushing the wheel. Each moved with the concentration of someone in conversation, not with each other, but with the clay. The wheel turned with a soft murmur, a gentle grind of wood on stone. The oldest potter sat nearest the door. His hair was silver, cropped short, his arms corded with years of repetition. His hands were large yet precise. The lump of clay before him rose like a breath, narrowing at the waist, widening into a belly, curving like the moon in its second phase. He did not look up. "Clay remembers," he said after a while. "If your thoughts wander, so will the pot." I nodded and watched. Another potter nearby shaped small bowls, turning each one with 3 practiced twists, then pinching the rim as if sealing a secret inside. She hummed softly. No words, just sound, like a lullaby forgotten by language but remembered by the hands. The youngest sat by the window working a jug with wide handles. He glanced at me and smiled. "The fire's nearly ready," he said. "You'll want to stay for that." The kiln crouched at the back of the room, a domed creature of brick and soot. It glowed faintly, not with flame, but with the promise of it. Inside were rows of freshly dried vessels, pale as bone, waiting to be transformed. "We don't force it," the elder potter said, rising to stoke the fire. "If the flame's in a bad mood, it will let us know." He opened a narrow mouth at the base of the kiln and fed in twigs soaked in oil. The fire accepted them with a gentle hiss. Soon the glow deepened, turned orange, then red. Shadows danced along the walls, long fingers, coiling smoke, the silhouettes of forgotten deities drawn in ash. The heat spread, but it was not harsh. It was the kind of heat that settled into your chest, into your breath, the kind that made you still without making you stiff. I sat near the doorway, watching, listening. The wheel continued its low chant. The fire exhaled, the clay spun, and all around the workshop held its quiet song. Outside, the wind stirred the dust into little spirals. A child peeked in, eyes wide, then vanished. Somewhere a dove cooed, but inside, time turned like the wheel, steady, circular, always coming home. The elder placed a finished pot beside the door, its surface still damp. It bore no mark, no signature, just a slight ridge near the base, his only tell. "If it lasts," he said, "that's enough." He showed me his hands, cracked, stained, powerful. These hands have shaped urns for grain and jars for wine. Lamps for scholars, cups for brides, even burial vessels once. He smiled faintly. Each one meant something different, but to me they were all the same. Clay becoming form, form becoming memory. He returned to the wheel. The fire hissed again. A cup cracked in the kiln with a soft, sharp pop. No one flinched. "That one wasn't ready," the younger potter said with a shrug. We talked little. Words would only disturb the rhythm. Instead, I watched as the elder finished another pot, slipped a damp cloth over it, and began anew. Clay, water, wheel, hands. Over and over. A loop, a breath, a life. Before I left, he pressed something into my palm, a small cup, no wider than my thumb. Glazed but simple, the curve of it fit my fingers exactly. "For tea," he said, "or secrets." I thanked him. And as I stepped back into the sunlight, the wind brushing clay dust from my robe, I felt it, the weight of what I carried, not the cup, but the act, the making, because some things are made not to be sold, not even to be used, but to remind us that even from dust we can create something warm, something that holds, something that lasts. I left the village behind just before the light turned golden, not because I had to, but because something in the sky beckoned a softness at the horizon, a hush just beyond the fields, where the land stopped pretending to be tame and became desert once more. The sand began slowly. At first it was just dust on the road clinging to sandals. Then, as the date palms thinned and the grasses gave way, it became more confident, wider, smoother. Ripples like waves paused mid-breath. I walked without hurry. There was no path, not really, just an instinct, a pull. The kind that leads you, not to a destination, but to a moment. The sun hung low now, a sphere of molten copper descending into a cradle of dunes. Its light poured sideways, catching the ridges of sand and turning them into velvet folds. Shadows lengthened like whispers, stretching across the earth. Even my own shadow, usually shy, grew tall and elegant behind me. There were no buildings here, no voices, only the wind. It played along the dunes like a child humming to itself, picking up grains of sand and tossing them into the air. They shimmered, for a moment, tiny stars against the fading blue, and then settled back down unbothered. The quiet was deep, not empty but full of time, full of memory. I came upon a large flat stone, half buried, sun-warmed. I sat upon it, brushing away a thin layer of sand. From here the world was endless. Dunes curved like frozen waves. The sky, once so bright, now bled slowly from gold to mauve to blue-gray. And then came that color, the one that exists only for a moment in Egypt. A kind of lavender gold, seen only when the last light meets the first stars. A color too soft to name, too fragile to keep. It brushed the dunes gently like a sigh and then was gone. I closed my eyes and listened. The wind moved in and out like breath. A jackal called somewhere, distant but clear. Pebbles shifted beneath my seat as if the stone itself was stretching. It is in places like this, bare, vast, open, where the mind begins to soften, not unravel but loosen, as if thoughts like the sand no longer need to hold their shape. I remembered then a story my grandmother once told, when I was too young to care and too old to forget. There is a hill, she said, out beyond where even the camels refuse to walk. They say it moves a little each year, just enough. And buried in that hill is a jar, and in that jar is a note. And on that note is written a question. No one knows what it says. But they say that when the right person finds it, they'll know. Not just the question, but the answer too. I asked her why no one had dug it up yet. Because the hill is patient, she said. And people are not. Now as the night crept quietly into the desert, I thought of that hill. I thought of the question waiting in the jar. And I smiled because I finally understood. The question isn't meant to be read. It's meant to be walked toward. The sky darkened. Stars appeared, first one, then 5, then 100. They blinked slowly as if waking from naps. Orion returned, faithful and clear. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of ghosts. The sand cooled beneath me. The wind softened. I lay back on the stone and watched the stars ripple, slightly, not from movement but from memory. I could almost hear them speaking, not in language but in light, not in answers, but in companionship. The desert held me, not tightly, not heavily, but gently, like a shawl around the shoulders, like a hand on the small of the back saying, "You are not alone." And in that vastness, that unbroken silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Stillness, not boredom, not emptiness, just stillness, as if for a little while the world had paused to listen, to the wind, to the breath of sand, to the soft footsteps of an old scribe walking toward a question written long before he was born. The Nile never sleeps. Even under the stars, even in the hush of midnight, it moves, slowly, steadily, like the breath of something ancient. And on this particular night, its surface shimmered beneath a full moon, casting a path of silver across The ripples like a thread meant to be followed. That's when I saw him. A single figure crouched near the edge of the water, adjusting a fishing net with the care of a priest tending a sacred offering. He was old, older than me, perhaps, and moved with the patient rhythm of someone who had done this for more seasons than he could count. His boat was small, narrow, carved from acacia, its wood darkened by years of sun and salt. It rocked gently. Beside the bank, tethered by nothing but trust, I approached slowly, my footsteps muffled by sand and moonlight. The fisherman looked up and smiled. He had few teeth but many wrinkles. His face was like the bark of an olive tree, weathered, knotted, and quietly beautiful. "Still awake?" he asked. "Still listening," I replied. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. With a soft grunt, he finished tying the last corner of the net and stood. His movements were careful, measured. He lifted the net into the boat, then gestured for me to join him. "Come," he said. "Fish don't like to be watched from the shore." We pushed. Off with a whisper, the boat slid into the water like a leaf. The current welcomed us, gentle and familiar. The moon rode high above, mirrored in the river, so that it felt as though we were floating through the sky. For a while, we didn't speak. He cast the net with a flick of his arm, the ropes opening, like a flower in bloom. It landed with a soft splash, the only sound in the wide silence. The Nile flowed around us. In the distance, frogs croaked lazily. Somewhere, a night bird called out, a soft, liquid note, neither happy nor sad. Just awake. The fisherman sat cross-legged and closed his eyes, breathing in the night as though it were incense. "I've been fishing this stretch for 50 years, he said eventually, "and I still don't know what I'm chasing." "Fish?" I offered gently. He laughed, a sound like dry papyrus crackling. "Some nights, yes, but most nights, I think it's something else, something quieter." He pulled the net in slowly, checking for movement. A single tilapia shimmered in the mesh, barely bigger than his palm. He smiled, untangled it gently, and placed it in a clay bowl at his feet. "Good," he said. "One is enough to make the rest worth it." I watched him work, each motion deliberate, respectful, as if every knot tied, every rope pulled, was a kind of prayer. "The Nile doesn't always give," he continued. "But she always listens, that's why I speak to her." "What do you say?" I asked. "Stories," he shrugged. "Dreams, regrets, the names of people I miss." He looked out over the water. "I once told her about my wife," he said, his voice lower. "The night after she passed, I came out here and told the river everything I remembered about her. Her laugh, the way she used to burn the flatbread every third Tuesday, how she smelled like cloves and almonds." He paused. The river didn't say anything, of course, but the next morning the water was calm, and I caught 7 fish with 1 net. We drifted in silence for a while. I dipped my fingers into the water. It was cool, smooth, not cold. The current tugged lightly like a child asking to be followed. "I don't fish to feed myself anymore," the old man said. "My sons send me grain and oil, but I fish to remember. When I'm on the water, I'm young again. I'm every age I've ever been." He cast the net once more. It arced through the air, paused mid-flight, then fell. This time, it came back empty. He didn't mind. We stayed there, rocking gently, wrapped in moonlight and hush. The world felt smaller out here, as if reduced to only the boat, the net, and the stretch of river that still carried the dreams of those long gone. "Do you ever wish you'd done something else?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "The Nile is enough. She's a good listener, and she always takes me home." The stars shifted overhead. A breeze picked up, soft and warm. The moon began her descent, and the water turned from silver to grey. Eventually, he turned the boat around. We didn't rush. The net lay at our feet, empty but content. The fisherman hummed a tune I didn't recognize, low, circular, ancient. When we reached the shore, he didn't say goodbye. He just nodded, patted the rim of his boat, and disappeared into the dark. I stayed for a while, watching the ripples smooth themselves back into stillness, and I thought, not every journey is meant to find something. Some are just to remember how to float. Not far from the river, behind a low mud brick wall covered in creeping vine, stood a house older than memory. It leaned a little to the left, as if tired from holding so many nights in its arms. Its windows were small, its doorway rounded with ware, and its roof, woven from palm thatch, whispered in the breeze like dry reeds brushing against each other in quiet conversation. This was the house of the old women. Not just any women. These were the ones who remembered the stories before the scribes wrote them down. They spoke in proverbs, hummed in riddles, and cooked as though their pots knew secrets they would never share aloud. And each night, just after the last goat had curled itself to sleep, and the frogs began their nightly chorus, they gathered. The fire pit in the center of the courtyard flickered to life, casting a soft, golden light against the worn walls. Around it, cushions were placed, not in rows but in circles. Everything here was round, the fire, the pots, the bread, the laughter. I was invited, gently and without words. Someone simply patted the cushion beside hers, and I understood. The air smelled of anise and thyme, a kettle bubbled with hibiscus tea. Somewhere a cat purred. The fire cracked once, and that was the signal. One of them cleared her throat, a soft, theatrical sound, and began. There once was a crocodile who forgot how to swim, she said, eyes half closed, voice low and sure. He lived near the reeds and dreamed of flying. Every day, he watched the ibises rise into the sky and whispered to his own tail, "One day I will leave the river and follow them." The others nodded, not because they agreed, but because they had heard this one before, and it always deserved. The same rhythm, but crocodiles, she continued, are made for waiting, and so he waited and waited until the river forgot he was there. No one asked what happened next. That was not the point. Another woman leaned forward, her scarf falling gently over one shoulder. Her voice was higher, more playful. Once there was a date pit who fell in love with the wind. She wanted to be carried, to see the pyramids, to dance across the sand. But the wind was careless and the pit was heavy, so she waited in the dirt, sulking, until one day she sprouted. A pause. She never saw the pyramids, but now the pyramids see her. Soft laughter. A sip of tea. Then silence, warm and complete. Looked around the circle. Each face was a map, lined and kind, creased with smiles and seasons. Their hands, some clasped, some stirring tea, some folded on their laps, moved with quiet purpose. These were hands that had woven linen, ground grain, buried husbands, raised grandchildren. And yet, here they were, telling stories with the same delight as children who've just learned how to invent. "There's a woman in the West," said another, her voice no more than a whisper. "They say she lives in the dunes and wears a crown of blue scarabs. She walks backwards so the wind never knows her destination. If you meet her, she'll ask you one question: are you walking away or returning? No one ever knows what to answer." "She only appears to those who forget why they left," another added, nodding to herself. No one asked who she was. No one doubted her crown, because here, in this circle, truth did not need proof. It only needed rhythm. They told of talking, cats who kept secrets in their whiskers, of temples hidden in palm groves that only appear in the fog, of fishermen who sailed into the stars and returned with moonlight in jars. I listened, not to the stories but to the space between them, that gentle pause after a line when breath is drawn and someone smiles softly, that shared silence where the fire speaks. One woman tapped her finger against her cup. "Do you know why scorpions Carry their stingers high, she asked. To remember they were once stars, another replied. And that was that. The night deepened, the tea grew strong, the stories softened into murmurs. A tale began about a donkey who learned to read, but it trailed off mid-sentence. No one minded. Someone else began a tale about a jar that laughed when opened, but it faded into a hum. The fire crackled low. The stars blinked overhead, slow and unhurried. One by one, the women leaned back, heads resting against rolled blankets, shawls drawn up over their shoulders. No goodbyes. Just sighs. Just silence. I stayed a while longer, watching the embers glow, and I thought, some stories don't need endings. Some are meant to live in the air, drifting like smoke, circling like owls sleeping in the folds of memory until someone somewhere calls them awake again. We left the Nile at dawn, not in haste but in stillness. A traveller had arrived the previous evening, wrapped in faded linen, eyes like slow-burning coals. He spoke with few words, but carried a presence that hushed even the frogs near the riverbank. He told me of a place where the wind forgot to move, where the rocks held memories not carved by hands, but by silence. A monastery, he called it, hidden in the stone bones of the southern hills, far from the reach of cities or floods. It is not sacred, he said, but it remembers what is. And so we walked. The land changed slowly as we moved southward. The palms grew sparse, the reeds gave way to sand, and then to stone. The heat sharpened, but the air was clear. Clear in a way that made everything seem more real, more bare, as though the land had shed its stories and kept only its breath. Our footsteps echoed between the rocks. We spoke little. There was no need. Every so often we passed a cairn, stones, stacked in quiet balance by unseen hands. Some were new, some so old that lichens had begun to write their own poems upon them. These were not markers, they were acknowledgments, as if each passer-by had left behind a whisper. I was here. I saw. By midday the hills rose in curves and creases, red stone, ochre cliffs, shadows like water spilling over ledges. And then there it was, tucked into the curve of a canyon wall, the monastery. Not grand, not gleaming, just there. Its walls were the same color as the rock around it, as if the earth had grown a dwelling for silence. No domes, no gates, just a door made of cedar, weathered and grey. A rope bell hung beside it, frayed and still. The traveller pulled it gently. A soft chime echoed once, then again, and then the door opened. An old man stood there, head shaved, robes clean, eyes quiet. He bowed slightly and stepped aside. We entered. The air was cool, not cold, but clean, the kind of cool that lives deep in stone, older than shadow. A faint scent of olive oil and dust. The floor was swept smooth, the walls lined with alcoves where candles flickered like small, steady stars. No one spoke. We were led to a small chamber, bare, save for a low bench, a clay jar of water, and a niche in the wall that held a single, unlit lamp. "This is where you sit," the old monk said softly. "Not to learn, but to forget." He bowed and left. I sat. The bench was rough, but it welcomed me. The silence did not press down. It expanded. My breath slowed. My thoughts floated. There were no chants, no teachings, no statues, only stone and stillness and breath. I did not know how long I remained. Time in places like this forgets to measure itself, but eventually a sound called me back. Not a voice, a note. High, soft, clear, like a bell made from moonlight. Followed it. In the central hall, 6 monks sat in a circle. One held a small polished stone and struck it gently with a reed stick. The note rang out and faded slowly into the room, as if the air were drinking it. Then silence, then another strike, then silence again. I sat at the edge of the room, wrapped in the quiet music. Each sound was a breath, each pause a reminder. I did not need to understand, I only needed to be. After some time, the old monk approached and offered me bread and water. I ate slowly. The bread was simple, wheat and salt, but it tasted like sun and patience. The water was cool. It tasted like stone in the best way. That night I slept on a woven mat beneath a skylight. The stars watched gently. No dreams came, only peace. And when morning returned, the traveler and I bowed in gratitude. No words, only a nod. As we descended from the cliffs, I looked back once. The monastery was already gone, not truly, but hidden again, folded into the rock like a breath between sentences, and in my chest, something remained. Not a lesson, but a space, a clear, quiet space where stories wait and silence sings. The village woke a little earlier that morning, not with the urgency of labor or the alertness of danger, but with a kind of quiet anticipation, like the hush before the first note of a song. The air was softer, the light gentler. Even the birds seemed to pause between calls, as if sensing that something delicate was about to begin. Today was a wedding day, not the grand affair of nobility, not the lavish parades seen in cities. Just a village wedding, under a tree near the river with friends, family, and the scent of rosewater on linen. I was drawn by the murmurs, hands weaving garlands, children chasing each other with fig leaves tied to their wrists, the occasional strum of a stringed instrument tuning itself into readiness. The tamarisk tree had been chosen days before. It stood at the edge of the village, where the land kissed the river, its branches low and graceful. Its bark held the color of old honey, and its leaves whispered when touched by wind. Beneath it, villagers laid down woven mats, swept the ground clean, and tied ribbons of dyed flax to the surrounding shrubs. Nothing flashy, nothing forced, just tender. The bride was young, not more than 16, with hair plaited into 2 long braids, each wrapped in strands of copper thread. Her robe was simple but new. Undyed linen, soft and flowing, embroidered along the hem with tiny blue fish, a symbol of life and fertility. The groom wore a tunic the color of clay, and a broad smile that refused to leave his face. His hands trembled. Only once, when fastening the necklace he had carved for her from a piece of river shell. "I found it after the first flood of the season," he whispered. "It shone in the silt like a small moon." Guests arrived slowly. Each brought something small. A pot of honey, a pinch of salt, a folded cloth, a song. No invitations had been sent. Only the rhythm of the village knew, and that was enough. An elder began the ceremony. Not a priest, not a judge, just a grandmother with hands like olive bark and a voice that carried like wind through reeds. She didn't read from scrolls. She simply looked at the couple, smiled with her whole face, and said, "Plant each other like seeds, water each other with patience, and when storms come, hold the same root." The crowd murmured agreement. Someone poured pomegranate juice into 2 small cups. The couple drank, then exchanged dates, one dried, one fresh, sweetness and strength. Then they held hands, not tightly but gently, as if holding a bird between them. Music began, slow and low. A lyre, a drum made from stretched goatskin, a single reed flute. The melody wound its way through the air like incense, subtle, fragrant, unforgettable. Dancers didn't need prompting. The children danced first, their steps wild and silly, laughter rising like bubbles. Then came the elders, arms swaying, hips remembering, and finally the couple danced, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence, as if their steps had waited years to find each other. Plates of food appeared, lentils cooked with leeks, flatbread brushed with oil, cucumbers soaked in vinegar and mint. Someone passed me a bowl of roasted chickpeas dusted with coriander. I ate slowly, savoring the salt, the spice, the warmth of it all. The river glimmered nearby, lazy and kind. The tamarisk tree offered shade. A breeze played with the bride's veil. Somewhere a dog barked, then gave up and lay down beside a basket. "Have figs." The elder returned with a bowl of water and washed the couple's feet. "Leave the dust of yesterday behind," she said. "Tomorrow has its own." The sun climbed higher. The wedding slowed but did not end. It softened. Guests lay back on the mats, conversations melting into quiet smiles. The couple sat side by side, not speaking much, just leaning into the same breeze. I sat beneath the tamarisk and let the light dapple through the leaves. I thought about all the weddings that had happened before this one, all the ones yet to come. I thought about the rhythm of union, not just in ceremony, but in living. In eating together, in watching stars together, in holding silence together, and I thought, this is what survives. Not the gold, not the names, but the way two people look at each other across a bowl of chickpeas, the way they walk home slower than usual, even though the path hasn't changed. The way laughter lingers longer on days when someone is chosen. The sun tipped west. The guests began to rise. They carried nothing with them but the scent of roses, the taste of salt, and the echo of a flute still playing somewhere deep in their ribs. The bride stood last. She looked once more at the tamarisk tree, touched its bark, and smiled. I smiled too, because now this tree would remember, and so would I. Night returned with gentleness. The wedding had faded into twilight laughter, into plates emptied and music softened. Candles flickered in clay lanterns along the walls. Somewhere, the bride and groom were curled into each other, asleep beneath. New linens, the scent of rosewater still fresh in their hair. I walked alone now, wrapped in a shawl borrowed from a generous shoulder, past the edge of the tamarisk's shadow. The air had cooled, not cold but cool in the way that makes the skin hum slightly, like the memory of touch rather than touch itself. The path followed the river. It always did, and above me stars bloomed in silence, one by one at first, then in clusters, like ancient stories blinking into view. Orion again, and the faint arc of the Milky Way, tracing across the heavens like a question too big to answer. I paused beside an old fire pit, long since turned to ash. The embers still glowed faintly beneath the grey, like thoughts waiting for someone to stir them back into speech. I knelt and poked gently with a twig. A soft breath of warmth rose to meet my hand. Just enough to remind me it had once burned for someone, maybe for lovers, maybe for mourners, maybe just for warmth. A wind passed, slow and thoughtful, and with it came a memory, not a sharp one. Not a full one, just a sense. The smell of roasted barley, the sound of sandals on stone, a voice, deep and kind, reciting lines of poetry I no longer knew how to translate. I closed my eyes. The wind remembers what we forget, someone once said, and I believed it. I sat there for a long time, not sleeping, not thinking, just sitting. And in the stillness I began to feel the edges of something familiar. A night like this, a fire like this, the hush after joy, the quiet between chapters, the breath before dreaming. I remembered a boy once, myself, maybe, sneaking out to sit by the reeds, watching the stars, wondering if they watched back. I remembered a hand on my shoulder, my mother's, I think, and the way she said nothing, just sat beside me. Sometimes presence is the only language. A dog padded past, soft-footed and silent. It paused, looked at me, and then continued on, tail low, as if on a mission known only to dogs and gods. The river whispered, not in words but in water. The reeds bent their heads. The moon, full again, climbed higher and made silver out of everything. Sand, water, even my own breath. And the wind returned. This time it brought no story, only stillness. The kind of stillness that presses gently against your chest and asks, "Are you ready to rest now?" I leaned back against a low wall, pulled the shawl tighter, and let my eyes close. The world did not vanish. It just softened, like ink in water. Like song behind a door. In that space between waking and sleep, I heard a voice, not loud, not near, just there. "Do you remember the lemon tree by the well?" it asked, and I did, though I had not thought of it in years. "Do you remember the song the wind sang through its leaves?" I nodded, in sleep or in memory. "It is still singing," the voice said. "You have only forgotten the tune." And then it faded. I did not chase it. Not all things are meant to be held. Some are meant to pass through us, like wind, like scent, like a name once whispered into the dark. The fire pit dimmed, the stars brightened, and somewhere behind the reeds, a single owl called once, then fell silent. And so did I. The morning light came in slantwise, golden and soft, slipping through the lattice roof of the weaving house like a secret it didn't want to wake anyone with. It touched the floors first, baked mud warm from the night before, then slid gently up the wooden frames, finding the colored threads like sunlight drawn to silk. This was the House of Weavers. Not a grand place, just a long, low structure near the edge of the village, where the breeze came often, and the air always smelled faintly, of linen, crushed flowers, and thyme. Inside, the sound of the looms was already awake, not loud, not harsh, just steady. Tap, slide, pull, tap, like breath or a slow drum. There were 6 women working this morning, their feet bare, their fingers nimble, their eyes focused but soft. Each sat before her loom, a simple wooden frame strung with vertical threads waiting to be crossed. Their movements were practiced, muscle memory guided by the memory of generations. The eldest among them, a woman named Nesha, wore a scarf faded from many summers. Her back was straight, her hands calloused, but her touch was light. She wove blue into cream, not bright blue, not sharp, a gentle hue like sky after rain. She looked up at me and smiled. "The sky's been quieter this year," she said. "So, I'm weaving it softer." I nodded. It made perfect sense. Beside her, a younger girl wove green into gold. "For the wheat," she said shyly, "so it remembers the sun even when it's in the basket." The threads moved. Tap, slide, pull. The cloth slowly appeared like a memory rising from a dream. Each color had a name. Each pattern had a story. Some simple, like the wave stitch meant to mimic the Nile. Some complex, like the double falcon, used only for births or funerals, depending on the colors. Above each loom hung a strip of dyed wool, tied into knots, a code known only to the weavers. It told them where they had been, where they would go, not with maps but with shade and thread. The air was warm, but the rhythm cooled it. The scent of crushed indigo leaves lingered, mixed with the faint, chalky tang of lime powder used to treat the flax. A spindle spun gently in the corner, turning fibers into thread. Its motion was mesmerizing, round and round, no hurry, no pause. I sat for a while beside one of the looms. The weaver didn't speak. She only moved. Thread, slide, beat, repeat. I watched her fingers braid old stories into something new. She caught me looking and chuckled softly. "This one's for a blanket," she said, "for a baby not yet born, but he kicks a lot already, so I'm weaving it tight. He'll need something to hold him still." "Do you always know who your cloth is for?" I asked. She nodded. "The cloth knows, it tells me. Sometimes I start weaving and only find out halfway through. A stripe will widen unexpectedly, or A color will blend wrong and I'll realize, it's not for who I thought, it's for someone else, someone I haven't met yet. I smiled. The looms echoed on. Tap, slide, pull. The house breathed with them. In a quiet corner, an older woman sorted dyed yarn. She stroked each skein gently as if reading them. "This one," she said, holding up a soft purple, "is the color of bruised plums. I used it when my daughter married, and again when my husband passed. It doesn't care why you're weeping. This color, it just holds it." I touched the cloth being woven before me. It was warm, not just from hands or sun, but from the stories stitched inside. Each line a sentence, each color a feeling no word could hold. The looms didn't rush. The women didn't either. This was not work, not quite. It was something else, a remembering, a continuation, a gentle rebellion against forgetting. Because when a child wraps in cloth woven from their mother's laughter and their grandmother's patience, they are never alone, even if they never know why. I closed my eyes and let the rhythm carry me. Tap, slide, pull. Somewhere outside a dove cooed. A breeze lifted the hem of a half-finished robe and fluttered it like a whisper. And I thought, in that moment, if dreams had a sound, this would be it. If sleep had a beginning, it would start here with thread and breath and the hush between colors. The path to the necropolis was not marked. It wound itself between low hills of sand and scrub, curving like a forgotten thought. No signs pointed the way. Only the hush of the wind and the occasional silhouette of a weathered cairn offered quiet direction. I walked slowly. The morning was pale and soft, the kind of light that makes shadows long and silence deeper. The sand beneath my feet was cool, disturbed only by the prints of desert foxes and birds too light to leave anything but whispers behind. And then I arrived. Not all at once, but gradually, like stepping into a memory you didn't know you carried. The tombs rose from the earth, not grand pyramids or guarded sanctuaries, but humble stone markers, some square, some rounded, some half-buried beneath shifting dunes, each one a name, each one a story now told only by the angle of its tilt or the color of its lichen. This was not a place of mourning. It was a place of listening. I wandered between the stones. Some bore faint carvings, eyes of Horus, lotus blossoms, a single ankh. Others were blank, their words faded by wind and sun, but their presence unshaken. At the far end of the field, beneath a leaning acacia tree, stood the oldest marker of them all. It was tall, thin, and slightly cracked at the top. Its inscription, though mostly worn, still bore a line I could just decipher. He returned to the sky, and the sky welcomed him. No name, no title, just a sentence, just a promise. I sat beside it, not to grieve, but to breathe. The wind here spoke in long, low vowels. It did not rush. It wandered through the stones as if checking on old friends. A beetle passed by, its shell glinting like obsidian. It paused at my foot, then moved on. Nearby, someone had left a single date wrapped in cloth. An offering, perhaps, or a snack that memory refused to let spoil. I thought of all the hands that had visited here, hands that had touched these stones, hands that had tied palm fronds into bundles, hands that had written the names, carved the prayers, lit the oil, lamps long extinguished, all those hands now dust, and yet still here, still shaping, still remembered in the quiet curve of a stone leaning slightly east, in the thread of linen caught in a root, in the way the sand curved gently around each tomb, as if the earth were cradling it. A soft sound drew my attention. An old man walking slowly, carrying a small jar. Small. He didn't look surprised to see me. He nodded once and sat beside a flat tomb near the edge. From the jar he poured water, not on the grave, but on the ground beside it. For the fig tree, he said simply. There was no tree. Not yet. But he poured anyway. "I come each month," he said. "She liked figs. I think she'd be pleased if one grew near her." He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. He sat quietly for a while, then reached into his robe and pulled out a folded piece of papyrus. He read it silently, lips moving, eyes steady. When he finished, he tucked it back into the folds of his garment and whispered something into the air. Then he rose, bowed slightly to the tomb, and walked away. No farewell, no announcement, just presence. I remained seated for a while longer. The sun had risen higher now, casting sharp, clear lines across the sand. The stones seemed to glow, not with heat, but with something gentler, like memory made visible. I touched one gently. The stone was warm, rough, but steady. And I thought, we build these not just to mark, but to continue. To say, this person lived. This person was loved. This person once sat by the river or danced at a wedding or told a story beneath a tree. And now? Now they are part of the silence, but not lost in it. The necropolis was not silent because of absence. It was silent because it was complete. Nothing needed to be added. Nothing needed to be explained, only acknowledged, only respected. I stood, brushed sand from my robe, and whispered a thank you, not to any one tomb, but to all of them, to the place itself. And as I walked back toward the path, I did not feel heavy. Felt grounded, held, carried. The wind followed me for a while, tugging gently at my sleeve as if to say, "We remember." And I whispered back, "So do I." By the time I returned to the riverbank, the sun had already folded itself into the west. The sky above held the faint blush of evening, a quiet pink that softened into lavender, and then into the deep indigo of oncoming night. My boat waited, where I had left it, still, faithful, a little dusty along the edges, but otherwise untouched, its hull resting like a sleeping animal on the edge of the current, its rope loose, as if it too had trusted that I would come back. I stepped aboard. The wood creaked with recognition. The cushions welcomed me back with the scent of old fabric and a hint of oil from the small lamp I kept for nights like this. I lit it slowly, letting the flame rise in its own time. No rush. The Nile accepted me again without a word. We pushed, off with the barest motion, just a toe's nudge, a sigh against the pole, and we were moving, drifting. The stars above blinked awake. The moon followed close behind, silver and round, casting a trail across the water that shimmered with every gentle ripple. It looked like a path meant for dreams, wide enough for thoughts, narrow enough for peace. I sat cross-legged, wrapped in a thin shawl, and listened. No stories tonight, no markets, no temples, no songs, just water and wind and the quiet return of breath. My fingers trailed in the river. The water was cool, like memory. It held the weight of every place I had visited, every person I had met, every silence I had shared. It held them not with burden, but with grace. The kind of holding that asks nothing in return. Nearby a heron stood still at the bank, one leg lifted, unmoving, a piece of moonlight carved in feathers. It blinked once, turned its head, then remained. The boat rocked gently, a cradle for thought, and I let go. Of names, of destinations, of the need to collect or recall. All of it drifted downstream, folded, into the hush of the Nile's night song. I closed my eyes for a while, not to sleep, not yet, just to rest in the dark behind my lids, where the river continued and the stars floated lower. I thought of the first night I began this journey, how the candle had flickered beside me, how the moon had danced on the water, how the sky had asked me, "Are you ready to listen?" And now, many stories later, I knew the answer had never been yes or no. The answer had always been, "I am here." The boat turned slowly, caught in a lazy eddy. then released. I adjusted nothing. Some things steer themselves when you don't interfere. Some paths appear only when you're not looking. I leaned back and watched the stars shift above me. They didn't seem far anymore. They seemed near, familiar, like old friends who needed no catching up. The lamp beside me burned low, casting a soft circle of amber that swayed with the boat's rhythm. The water slapped the hull now and then, gentle like someone knocking not to enter but to remind you they're nearby. A frog croaked, then silence again. And that silence, it was not empty. It was full of farewells that didn't need to be spoken. Full of paths walked and dust left behind. Full of firelight now extinguished but still warming the bones. I let out a slow breath, the kind that comes not from lungs, but from somewhere deeper, where rivers and time intertwine. No story. Tonight, only return, only drift, only moonlight on the Nile, and the sense that for now I am exactly where I should be. Sleep did not arrive all at once. It crept in softly like a mist curling over the banks of the Nile, folding itself around the edges of my thoughts, dimming the lantern of my awareness one breath at a time. I was still on the boat, or perhaps I was not, because suddenly the river was no longer water but glass, still and clear, stretching endlessly in every direction. The stars above reflected perfectly below, so that I floated not between banks but between skies. I was neither sitting nor lying, just drifting, weightless. Somewhere in the near-far dark, I heard a voice familiar, not with sound but with presence. "You've come far," it said. I turned, or thought I did, but saw no figure, only reeds rising from the water like hands reaching for memory. Each reed had an eye, not watching me, remembering me. "I know you," one whispered. "I held your breath when you first told a story," said another. I drifted further. Now the river bent, upwards, yes, upwards, curving into a spiral of water and wind, a staircase of reflection that led into the sky. I followed. No need to paddle. The boat knew. On the bank stood shadows, not frightening, just waiting. The baker from the market smiled and handed me warm bread. The potter offered a cup, though his hands were made of clay now. The children from the wedding danced in a circle. Half starlight, the temple priest lit incense that turned into birds, and the old women. They sat beneath a tamarisk that now grew upside down from the clouds, weaving stories into wind. "We told you," they said in one voice. "The ending isn't the end." My boat passed beneath them. The tree dropped a petal onto the water. It glowed. I touched it. Suddenly I was no longer in the boat. I was walking through fields of linen where threads hummed like bees, and every step I took stitched a new memory into the ground. Each footstep whispered a word. Child. River, fire, silence, return. The sky above split, not in violence but in invitation. From it descended a jar. Yes, the one from the hill in the desert, the one with the question. It floated before me. I reached, opened. Inside. Not words, but warmth and scent. The smell of fig trees, of wet stone, of bread crust and candle smoke. It wrapped around me, and I was a child again, sitting in my grandmother's lap, listening to her hum a song about crocodiles who wept when no one looked. Then I was a man, older, barefoot in a field, pressing seed into damp soil and whispering names I never told anyone aloud. Then I was neither, just breath, just boat, just drift. The dream folded itself gently. The sky bent low and kissed the water. The stars closed their eyes, and the boat returned to stillness. I was still. No thoughts. No need. Only this. Only here. Only the Nile, holding the dream like a mother holds a sleeping child. Not to protect, but to cradle, to allow, to remember, to release. The river was still when I opened my eyes, not because it had paused, but because it no longer needed to move to be known. It simply was. Vast, soft, present. Around me, the world had quieted into shape. The lantern beside me had burned down. Out of a sleepy glow. The cushion beneath me carried the faint warmth of a long night well spent. My robe smelled faintly of the fire I once sat beside, of the reeds I once brushed past, of the old women's tea, of the clay bowl I never quite returned. The stars above began their slow fade. Dawn had not yet come, but she was nearby, her fingers already stretching gently across the sky, pushing the darkness back not with command but with kindness. I sat up slowly. My bones ached in the way that reminds you they've been useful, the river whispered, not in new words, just in a familiar rhythm, a heartbeat. I looked out across the water and saw nothing unusual, no spirits, no visions, no riddles, just the Nile, endless and utterly at peace with herself. I reached down and touched the water once more. It met my fingers without resistance. Cool, awake, unhurried. You remember me? I whispered. The ripple that followed said, Of course. I sat quietly for a while. No urge to speak, no reason to move, just watching, just breathing. And in that stillness, I began to notice the small things. A dragonfly landing on the bow, its wings trembling like delicate thoughts. A bird circling overhead, calling once before continuing west. The soft flap of linen against wood as the breeze played gently with the boat's edge. And my breath, in out, in out. No longer waiting, no longer chasing, just here. And then, not suddenly, but softly, I felt it. The end, not as a wall, but as a curve, like the edge of a bowl, where the story settles, not to be sealed, but to be held. I looked to the sky one last time. The stars were nearly gone, but their memory lingered. Not in the heavens, but in me. Every light I had followed, every path I had wandered, every name I had forgotten. They were still there, still shining, just more quietly now. I placed a hand over my chest, felt the slow, sure thud, not fast, not loud, just true, and in that rhythm I heard every voice again, the fisherman humming, the weaver tapping, the bride whispering, the monk silent, the stone sighing, all of them with me. Always. A breeze rose. It brushed my cheek and passed on, carrying no message, only feeling, only wind. I closed my eyes once more, not to sleep, but to listen. And in the deep, warm hush that followed, the boat rocked gently, the water sang softly, and the world, just for a while, forgot how to be. Heavy, the Nile flowed. The breath came and everything finally was enough.